Good morning, it's Joanna here. I am coming from my library today and I thought I would do another story time. This time I want to speak about giants. So for those of you that are brand new to my page, who don't know anything about me, I am a metaphysical teacher. I am a spiritual entrepreneur. I am a life and business coach. And I also am an author of several books and soon to be card decks. So I have been interested in the origin of man. I have been interested in metaphysical concepts and metaphysical stories for my entire life. And especially things like ancient civilizations and things like that. So what I thought I'd do is jump on today and literally give you a story of some lost history that is not taught in the mainstream narrative and it's not mainstream history. Mainstream history is kind of boring and a lot of it has been really rewritten to fit other narratives. When you get down into the kind of juicier history of the meat and potato history, things start getting really strange and start taking a little detour. So today's story that I'm going to be talking about is the story of giants. And I love this because there is so much evidence and physical evidence that actually proves that not only were giants real, but they may still be real. They may still inhabit this world. So I'm going to get into it. So we're going to start with the context of the first context that I want to bring into this narrative is, where did giants come from? Like, what was the idea of giants? Where did they come from? What was going on there? Now, one of the things with our modern day kind of things like ancient text and things like Bibles, one of the biggest issues with the Bible for me personally, especially the Bible in the English version, is that a lot of people don't realize, but the Bible was actually translated from Aramaic to Greek, then from Greek to Latin, and Latin to English. It's like frickin'. Have you ever played Chinese Whispers? If you've ever played Chinese Whispers, that is the state of modern day Bible. So this isn't a biblical story or a super religious story in any way, shape or form, but I'm going to read a quote. Now remember, this quote is coming from the King James Bible, right? And it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also thereafter, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, they bore." And what that meant was that they basically had babies. And this is what birthed an entire race that they call the Nephilim. The Nephilim are apparently half angel and half human. So they're a hybrid species, is what the Bible says. This is what the Bible says on this. Now, later on, we have lots of history that backs up that there was actually giants on the earth. The funny thing is, if you actually go back to the translation here, it says they were in the earth, not on the earth. Wait a minute. I'm gonna rendezvous back to that, the in the earth and not on the earth bit. Okay. So in 1848, so in the terms of timing, not that long ago, Abraham Lincoln was talking about the magnificence of the Niagara Falls, right? So Abraham Lincoln was talking about the absolute magnificence of the Niagara Falls. And here's what he says: "The eye of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America." Okay, I'll say that again. "The eye of that species of extinct giants, whose bones fill the mounds of America. And what that quote goes on to say is, and he wrote this in the September of 1848, and what he was marveling at was that he was gazing at these Niagara Falls and how spectacular they were, but he was also marveling at the fact that these giants who came before them, who lived before them, also had gazed on the same sight. And he was saying, you know, this is maybe a shared moment between our species, right? But he says, the species of extinct giants whose bones filled the mounds of America. So what mounds are they? So America is literally littered with these giant mounds that are apparently Native American in origin. Okay, now the Native Americans, they tell of stories. Many of the Native American tribes tell of a story that they were at war with a race of giants. And this race of giants had 6 fingers and 6 toes. They had 2 rows of teeth, and they had red hair. They were red-headed giants. And the Native American culture, they basically describe in many, and remember, this is not the nations, the Native American nations, they were hundreds and hundreds of different nations. And in the absolute, like, beginning, like, you've got to appreciate the absolute slaughter that happened in America. And I know that that's another story. We're not going to get into that, but you've got to remember, like, these nations and many of the nations are completely extinct now, but these nations of people, they numbered the millions, right? So these were common knowledge within these nation people, and a lot of the Native Americans told us. And why were they at war with the giants? Well, the giants were cannibalistic. They ate humans. They literally hunted humans, and the humans in America at the time were the Native Americans. So the Native Americans basically had this giant ass war on their hands, no pun intended, of where they were, and they'd managed to reduce the number of giants. They managed to reduce the giants living in America. And there's one such story which I want to share with you, and it's in a cave called Lovelock Cave in western Nevada. And the Native Americans called these tribe of giants Cti-Cha. And the Paiute Indians, they tell the story of, like, how they had reduced the tribe of giants to about 45 of them. And then they had basically gone on the war path against these giants because they were fed up of these giants literally using their massive strength against them, using their massive height and weight as an advantage, and literally picking them off and, like, killing their families and eating them, taking them up into the hills in Nevada and killing them. So what this does is that this story in Lovelock Cave is that they then said, the Native American story goes like this, that they trapped about 45 of the giants inside this cave, and the cave had only one entrance and one exit, so it was just one place to get into this cave. And then in the front of the cave, they literally barricaded the cave and set it alight. And round this cave, what they discovered in this cave is they found the remains of giant bones. So the Paiute Indians tell this story as part of their culture, but actually later on, archaeologists actually found the cave, found the bones in the cave, and they found right round the rim of the cave was all these scorch marks. So the story of the Paiute Indians have been passing down from generation to generation to generation, literally says. Now, the woman who wrote a book about this, about the Lovelock Caves, she was said to have a very beautiful traditional Native American dress, and in it she had this bright red colour at the front of the dress. Now, what she actually says is that this is actually was passed down to her, this this dress was passed down to her through her ancestral lineage, and actually the red is from the giant's hair. That's what was on her Native American dress that she had. So now we've got like even more evidence, but here's where things start to take a little bit of a weird turn, because when you went to school, did you hear about a race of giants? When you went to school, did anybody teach you that there had been another sentient species on this planet other than humans? Or was the narrative that you got the mainstream narrative that human beings are the only sentient species on the planet? Because I know I received that schooling at school, that we were the only sentient beings on the planet. So let me know in the comments if you were taught about giants at school other than outside the biblical reference of Genesis 6:4, which basically says in those days there were giants, right? So here's where things start to take a little bit of a funny turn. So in the late or mid 1800s to the early 1900s, there is literally hundreds of newspaper articles from all different newspapers all across America, all across the world, because giants aren't just limited to America. Here in Scotland, we have a lot of stories about giants. In my original home of Stockholm in Sweden, there is stories of the frost giants. These were a race of cannibalistic giant humans, or giants that basically ate humans. Same story here in Scotland. Although the Scottish giants and the Irish giants seemed a little bit more peace-loving, they did seem to leave people's heads on their shoulders, so they weren't really hunting humans so much. But let me know in the comments if you have ever heard in school, when you were schooled, did you ever hear of giants? Did you ever hear that we weren't the only sentient species on this planet? It's kind of weird, isn't it? Right? So in the early 1800s and early 19th century, it is common knowledge. We have Abraham Lincoln, who was the president of the United States. While he was a sitting president, he writes this letter in 1848. He is marveling at the Niagara Falls. He's making reference to the giants, to the buildings, the giants, the mounds. They're known as the mound builders, and they're also known as the megalithic builders, right? So all throughout the entire world, we have these giant megalithic structures that have blocks of stone that weigh tons and tons. And we as human beings can't figure out how the fuck they moved those blocks, because they're like, how do they move the blocks? Well, what if you had a super strong giant species that could move the blocks? Now, all giants weren't bad, because in Egyptian mythology and Egyptian history, what was taught in ancient Egyptian history is that these giants were helped to build the pyramids. They helped to build a lot of the structures, and these giants were looked after and pampered by these were pampered by the Egyptians because they were rare at that point in time. And so they were looked after and pampered. And there's lots and lots of reliefs of giant men that are, or men or giants, being pampered and showered and looked after. And you can see lots of images of this. They were written on the side of temples. Now, the side of a temple was precious space. You didn't fill that with any old crap. It was precious space. They put precious things on the side of temples. So they popped all this, they popped all these imageries and things like that. Now, according to the Egyptian government, basically they were just trying to, it was either fully grown adults with children, which you can tell it's not children that they're depicting, because the Egyptians drew their children a little bit different than they are drawing the adults. So it looks like fully grown adults next to these beings that are at least 2 to 3 times the height of them. And And so all throughout the world, we have these giants. So something really weird happens because here we are in 2023 and no one really knows anything much about the giants. Now, why is that? Well, at some point, they started to be written out of history. And one of the big culprits for writing giant lore and giant history out of our history is the Smithsonian. So there is lots and lots of newspaper articles from all over the world, literally thousands of them. And these newspaper articles talk about giant bones being discovered inside the mounds. So these big mounds being found all over America, mounds being found all over the UK, mounds being found literally everywhere, and that these mounds are found. Now, if you think about a mound, right? A mound looks like a hill, but it's apparently man-made. Well, they lived in the earth. Well, if they lived inside mounds, they would definitely be living in the earth. Now, there is this other theory that there's another theory, which is quite an exciting and interesting theory, and I might do a story time about that on its own, that there is actually a theory called the hollow earth theory, where our own earth is actually hollow and there's lands inside our earth. So again, we don't know. Do the giants live inside our earth, and are those mounds maybe entranceways into the hollow earth? So there's lots of different theories and things like that. But what we do know for sure is that giants are no longer taught in mainstream, and yet it was common knowledge in 1848. So common knowledge that a sitting president could make reference to them as though it was nothing. So here's why did that change from 1848 to 2023? Why have we got this massive change? Now, here's my personal theory. There is no scientific thing to back this up, but this is my own personal theory. The molecule of DNA was discovered by Swiss chemist Johann Friedrich Miescher, I think it's Miescher, in 1860. Okay, so that's when DNA was kind of the first inkling of DNA was discovered. Now, we were not meant to, we didn't fully map the genome and the human genome till the 1950s. So from 1860, when the molecule was first identified. Hi, Cindy. My goodness, it's so nice to see you. Michelle is saying, I've been reading about cities and crystals within the earth. Amazing. And Joan here is saying, top of the morning to you. So we've got this discovery of DNA. Okay. And then in 1950s, James Watson and Francis Crick, who were Cambridge University, were involved with the Cambridge University, goes ahead, basically announces in the Eagle pub, by Jove, we have discovered the secret of life, and they have now mapped the human genome. Okay. At this point in time, the Smithsonian, which is one of the largest historical institutions in the world, starts changing its tune about giants. They're like, no. We don't know what you're talking about. Now, all of these articles, especially the American articles, are saying giant bones were discovered of 9 feet tall people or 12 feet tall people. Giant bones were discovered of people who were, 8 feet to 9 feet tall. And on and on and on these newspaper articles go. But all of the newspapers, majority of them, have one thing in common. The Smithsonian has taken the bones, right, to store them, for archaeological, to store them. Now, the Smithsonian in the 1800s apparently had even a display of giant bones. Now, if you were to actually ask at the Smithsonian, if you were to phone them up and say, hi, do you have any displays of giant bones belonging to humanoid creatures? Do you have a display of that? They'll go, no. And then they say, do you have in your archives bones of giants? They'll be like, no, we don't know what you're talking about. No, we don't know what you're talking about. Now, my theory is that if you think about the periodic table, the scientific periodic table that names all the elements. Now, before that periodic table was fully complete, we knew that there was gaps in the table and we knew where those gaps went. Now, you got to remember in 1860, we discovered the molecule that is DNA. And this Swiss chemist discovers this molecule. And then it isn't until the 1950s we absolutely map DNA, totally forget that it was all based on the works of a woman called Rosalind Franklin, but we'll forget that story, that she had something to do with it, and we'll award James Watson and Francis Crick the Nobel Peace Prize, plus also as well all the notoriety for discovering DNA, when actually it was built on top of other scientists, including a female scientist called Rosalind Franklin. So we've got all of this going on. Now, I think, you know, if you look at the periodic table that has missing elements in it, we knew that those elements were there, but we just didn't know what elements they were. I think it's the same with the DNA. I think that somebody realized, like, hang on, wait a minute, we're going to be able to one day be able to map this, and it would be really, really inconvenient to have giants on the planet, because what we're going to find is that whereas human beings have got different stages of humans, right? There is no different stages of giants. Now, the reason there isn't different stages of giants is that they're a hybrid species. According to the Bible, they're a hybrid between the sons of God, aka angels, and a hybrid between humans. So really fucking awkward. Now, they would have known that. And that's when that starts getting wiped out of the rhetoric and the things. But there's a few heroes in this story. So if you go to a museum in Ecuador, and you can go and Google this, you can see it. They actually have one of the giant humanoid skeletons on display. And it is spectacular. When you see the size of this skeleton, it is freaking awe-inspiring. It is humongous. Now, that is in Ecuador, they're very open with their people, and they're like, yeah, absolutely, giants roam this entire country. Go to America, the scientific community is very tight-lipped. They're like, nope, 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 don't know what you're talking about. Smithsonian's like, absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, they haven't been able to expunge and get rid of all the newspaper articles from newspapers from the 1800s and the early 19th century that literally reported hundreds and thousands of these skeletons all over the US. So this is another example of where the narrative, our human narrative, has been altered, and our history has been altered to fit another agenda, to fit an agenda that, you know, does not make you question your origins, does not make you question where you came from. Because as human beings, as our technology has advanced, the questions for the people in power get more and more fucking awkward. And this is one of the things that I really, really love about delving into this. And this is why I have such an interest in things like science, metaphysical science, and lost civilizations and things. Because it really helps to uncover a truth and not the spoon-fed narrative that we've all been given, and kind of, to be quite frankly, lied to about a lot of things around the world. Now, you know, one of the things is that I really object to is that somebody somewhere really decided that we human beings couldn't handle it. We couldn't handle that we as a species, because you've got to remember, we've got our missing link. Now, last week's story time, I told you about the story of the Anunnaki and how the Anunnaki explain our missing link. The Anunnaki could also be seen as the sons of God. And again, within the Anunnaki stories, there is well documented, within those stories, it's well documented that they did take human wives. These other beings from another planet called Nibiru came onto Earth, took human wives, and again, in the Mesopotamian legends and stories, and even on these clay tablets that were found that literally outline the history of the Anunnaki, those children of human women and Anunnaki men became giants. And they were known not as the Nephilim, but it was a very similar word to the Nephilim. So we can see that the origin of the word Nephilim may even have come from ancient Mesopotamia. So I find things like this really, really interesting. But can I recommend some reading on this? I have literally over the years read thousands and thousands of books, and because I have like a brain that really retains knowledge, like anything I find fascinating literally goes into the vault and it's there forever. So but what I will say is go and Google the Ecuador giants. There's lots of books on giants, and what you really want to do is you want to find books where they really talk about this, the kind of like archaeology of giants, because there's a lot of archaeology out there. Now, obviously, there's hoax and there's things like that, but yeah. So Joan here saying, I'll ask my brother, he works in the museum in Dublin. So again, so the Giant's Causeway is made by basalt columns. These are volcanic columns, and the Giant's Causeway stretches all the way from Ireland all the way to Scotland. Now there is lots of, and the reason it's called the Giant's Causeway is that, again, and this is where giants get this like reference to constantly being referenced to being the megalithic builders, because according to Irish legend, the Giant's Causeway was actually built by giants. Now, according to geologists, what happened there was the basalt was ejected from the earth and cooled super quickly, which cooled it into these rather cool looking hexagonal columns that create the Giant's Causeway. Now, the Giant's Causeway, you can find that in Scotland as well, in a place called the island of Staffa, that's built entirely of these basalt columns. But again, giants are all over that, and again, it's a megalithic structure. There is giants who apparently built Stonehenge. There's giants who built apparently the pyramids. Everywhere where there is megalithic structures, there is stories of giants. Right? The two go hand in hand. And this is one of the things that I find really, really fascinating with this. But my personal opinion is that acknowledging giants in the scientific community, acknowledging giants would make us ask a lot of awkward questions. And even though, and for the longest time, I couldn't work out why would they get rid of the history of giants? Why would they get rid of that, right? Because I think in the early days, the people controlling the narrative of Earth and controlling the rhetoric of what we were hearing and what we were getting to know, the knowledge we got to know of Earth, were very much steeped in religion and church and things like that. You know, a lot of things have been suppressed because of the church and stuff. And so I never could understand, because like, obviously it backs up Genesis. It backs up in those days, there were giants. And it backs up what the church is, you know, it backs up basically the David and Goliath story. It backs that up as well, right? So I couldn't understand, like, why would they want to keep this out of public domain? Why would they want to not acknowledge these creatures? Because it kind of like backs their stories up, right? Like it backs up like the Bible is true. not that the Bible is like the most heavily edited book on the frickin' planet, but never mind, we'll not talk about that. We'll pretend that the whole thing is gospel. Even that saying, right? It's gospel. It must be like absolute truth. And it's so funny how we're conditioned into this, but I couldn't understand. But then when I really started thinking about the DNA and how it was discovered in 1860, and it was really about the early 19th century that the Smithsonian started getting really cagey about the existence of giants, and then they wiped that story completely from human history. Like, nope. Now, we have got multiple Native American tribes that tell stories of giants who ate them and were cannibals, and literally, and remember, they were cannibals, right? So we don't call people who eat meat cannibals, right? So the Native Americans must have recognized some of themselves in these giants. These giants were humanoid looking enough for them to call them cannibals and not another, you know, like you wouldn't call you know, a lion that ate you a cannibal, or some other big predatory animal a cannibal. But they called these people cannibals, which means that I really do believe that it was common knowledge that we shared some type of ancestry with these beings. And again, it brings in this whole kind of rhetoric of like us questioning our origins a bit much, and that for the establishment brings about some really, really fucking awkward questions. So I have just learned about something that I'm going to dig deeper into, and that might be story time for another time. But I've just read, so one of the things that I really love is all the banned books of the Bible. And that's something that I find really, really fascinating, because the banned books are actually more interesting than the Bible itself. So we've got the 3 books of Enoch that were banned from the Bible and removed completely. But I have just discovered that there is actually called a Book of Eden. And that is very interesting reading, in that Cain and Abel, according to the Book of Eden, Cain and Abel were both twins, and they had twin sisters. So they had, Cain had a sister, and Abel had a sister, and they were born as twins. And then apparently Eve went ahead and gave birth to 52, quite the feat, 52 daughters. And that's very interesting as well. But if you like these stories, this story time, and if you like these stories about our suppressed history and you know, things that are out there, and you're interested in that. Now, I did say, let me know in the comments if you like these type of stories, if you find them fascinating as well, and if you enjoy these type of stories, because maybe I'll make it into a little series and do one every so often. But I've been a student of metaphysics and a student of ancient history and knowledge for like as long as I can remember. Like when it was one of the things that I shared with my dad, that he really loved things like this. So, you know, I remember sitting around the, you know, dinner table, when I was younger, you know, discussing things like crystal skulls and stuff like that. And this crystal skull stories, they're amazing. They're amazing. And they also, interestingly enough, they also have a connection with giants. But apparently there is 13 crystal skulls, and they've never been brought together. They've never been brought together. A few of them have been brought together. What makes these crystal skulls so incredible is that they've all been carbon dated to being thousands and thousands of years old, and yet they show no tool marks, like no tool marks on them, which means that they had a technology more sophisticated than the technology that we have today in order to even cut these skulls. and fashion them out of pure rock quartz. And we know that rock quartz can store energy and store information. And a lot of people who have meditated with these skulls it's fascinating because they get downloads and they talk about galactic connections and all that good stuff, right? So I love this type of history. I mean, I live for this. This is why I was so happy to get a house with an actual library. And I've got, you know, you can see a couple of my bookcases, but I've actually got 6 of those bookcases just filled with, well, that one straight behind me is filled literally mainly with card decks, but a lot of them are filled with lots of books on different esoteric subjects and history and things like that. And I've been, you know, reading this type of material for literally like most of my life, like since I started reading. And so I love talking about it, but what I was talking about was in the giants, in the lores of all the giants and everything like that, there's so much evidence. Now, if you go onto my Pinterest account, I've actually got on my Pinterest account, I've actually got a board on my Pinterest account called Ancient Giants. And that has a lot of images and pictures of basically giant things. There's like a finger that was found in an attic in one of the Scandinavian countries. Apparently this grandfather had died, and his family were clearing out the attic, and they literally found a mummified giant finger, nail intact, everything. So that's you know, there's lots of these stories. There's actually an image on my pin board of a man with metal trolley, and it's from the early 19th century, and it's actually a picture apparently taken from the Smithsonian of a giant human skull sat on top of this trolley with a man standing next to it. And you can see the contrast of how much larger this skull is than the man that's the head of the man that's standing next to him and things like that. The image of the giant that's actually on display in the museum in Ecuador, that in its own is spectacular because they've got photographs of humans standing next to it. So they've got photographs of that. Karen, I can't actually get to my thing because I'm on my phone just now, so if I go off it then I'll lose y'all on this live stream, but I will try and link it in. So yeah, there's loads of things like that as well. And you know, the story of giants also links so intrinsically in with the story of another story called, which we could really use the umbrella term of ancient aliens. So at some point that advanced cultures came and basically either assisted mankind or messed with our genetics in such a way that modern day man became a thing. But it's very, very interesting, and I find this history far more interesting than the absolute garbage that I was fed at school. And I think also as well, like there are certain things that really, really piss me off about this. There's lots of things that we have taken out of our history that I actually think, had it been taught mainstream, the world would perhaps not be in the state that it's in today. So one of the things that I think has done, especially the West world, a massive, massive disservice is that we do not teach reincarnation. The Western rhetoric is that this is your one life and enjoy it, and we don't teach reincarnation. Now, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence for reincarnation. And then on top of that, not only is there this overwhelming evidence of reincarnation, but there is also, you know, the Eastern philosophies have taught it in years. But actually, when you discover that in the 14th century in Constantinople, they actually edited reincarnation out of the Bible. and they stopped teaching it in the Bible. Now, why would they, you think, why would they stop teaching it in the Bible? Well, if you had one life to save your immortal soul in, well, where the feck are you going to be on Sunday trying to save that wretched soul of yours? Of course you're going to be at church, and the churches aren't that broke, right? They made a lot of money from that. So smart move on the churches. Unfortunately, I think they really screwed humanity, because imagine if everyone was taught reincarnation. Well, think of all the waste that we dump. Think of all the toxic shit that we do. If you thought you'd come back here and live with the dump that you created, you wouldn't maybe want to dump so much. You wouldn't maybe want to be so wasteful, or you wouldn't maybe want, because you're like, oh fuck, I've got to come back here. So if I've got to come back here, I might as well make it nice now. And I think, you know, we could probably eliminate a lot of the toxicity that we do had we taught concepts like reincarnation in the West. We teach them in Asian countries, and they're very, you know, in Eastern countries, reincarnation is very much a given. The whole, you know, if anybody knows anything about the Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama, you know, people say that he's chosen. He's not chosen. He's a reincarnation of previous lamas. And he is identified, he has been chosen by the divine, but the Dalai Lama is identified usually at a very, very young age. It's very unusual that a Dalai Lama will get to older years before they're identified, but they're usually identified as a child, and they're looking for traits. And then one of the sort of tests for the lamas are that they are given the previous lama's relics, so things that the previous lama, and then they have to identify what was theirs in their past life. So overwhelming amount of evidence in the West of children who have reincarnated. One of my past life regressions that I was actually able to go and find my grave in my previous life from the 1800s. And I was able to find like things out about my family that I had identified under hypnosis, and was able to identify all of those things. I've had, when I came here, when I reincarnated here on this planet again, you know, I came with a lot of my past life memories intact. So as a child, I would regale my mum with stories and things like that. And I have, you know, I've retained some of those memories and things like that. And actually every so often I'll get moments where I'll get fragments, and I know that they're not a weird thought. They're actually a memory of something that I'm remembering, but I know that it doesn't belong to this lifetime. That happened to me shortly after my light web activation. That was shortly after my light web activation. I realized that I started craving a sound. It's weird, right? I started craving the sound, and I was trying to describe it to my husband, and then I had a dream, and I saw the kind of like musical instrument that was making the sound. So I described it to my husband, and I said, well, you know, I was in ancient Egypt, and like, I don't know what this thing is, but it looked like this, and I sort of drew it and things. And the next thing, he's coming down with his computer going, is it this? And it was a sistrum. And I was like, oh my God. And then we went and YouTubed it, and we found a lady that was playing it. I was like, oh my God, that's the sound that I've literally been going mad over, craving. And he bought it for me. He bought me a replica of a sistrum that was played at the Temple of Hathor. And that was the lifetime. The lifetime that I was recalling was a lifetime where I was the high priestess of the Temple of Hathor. So, you know, these sort of things, if we taught these sort of things as mainstream narratives, if we taught them as like, these are mainstream things. I think there would be a lot of things that we wouldn't kind of like do to each other. And I think that, you know, we've missed out. And I think one of the things is that our disconnection with our own history is being created a dangerous kind of narrative, if you like. And here comes my pup. Come on, Daisy, up you come. So, you know, I think these are the things. So let me know if this is of interest to you. Do you think that, you know, if we had been taught like our actual history, that maybe perhaps we wouldn't be so horrible to the planet and things like that, and we would maybe tread a bit lighter on her and think, oh well, we're, you know, like if we dump lots of toxic chemicals you know, onto the earth now, we're going to have to rinse and repeat at some point in the future, and then that's going to be my mess to clean up in a future life. And I think a lot of us, you know, would perhaps be more cautious of how we're doing things. We'd maybe have a little bit more thought through and stuff like that. Karen's saying such a great point. Yeah, so that was story time today. So I hope you enjoyed talking about giants. Let me know if you have any questions. If there was anything that I said that you find really interesting, let me know if you have any questions. I can't cite any like specific sources because I get things from multiple sources. But there is lots and lots of information out there. All you need to do is look. And, you know, there is absolutely tons and tons of information out there. So, but there has been, you know, recently there's a man that has that I was following. This was another story that was like really quite like, this was another modern day giant story. So apparently this guy snapped a picture. Now he was like a bit of a fitness buff, so his content that he was making, he wasn't making any sort of spooky or weird or fringe science content. He was like talking about his muscles a lot, and that was the type of content that he was making. And he was driving along with a friend in a car, and he asked his friend to stop because he saw this thing on top of the mountain that looked like a person, but it looked like a giant person. So he took like a film of it, and it's like this dude just walking, but he is freaking ginormous on the top of this mountain. Then he started making some like really weird content with saying that he was being followed, and then he was saying that he was literally pulled over by men dressed in black, like as in Men in Black. And he was, you know, told that he had to retract. Then he went missing for several days. Then he shoots a video where he continually looks to the side and off camera. The video looks really forced, and he's holding a newspaper in his hands. You can see the date he's made the video, and he looks like shit scared in the video, and he's saying that he made it all up and it's all shit and he made it all up. And then he disappears. Then he makes that video to say it's all rubbish. He was talking rubbish. And then the next thing, he makes another video and says it's actually real. And a couple of weeks after that, he apparently unalived himself, which like is mind-blowing, right? So are giants still a thing? Is that maybe also another reason why they've taken them out of our history, so that we don't go looking for them? And if they are indeed cannibalistic, maybe we are at some sort of uneasy peace with them, and that it's maybe not a good idea to go looking for giants. It is a very strange thing. But yeah, if you go looking and things like that, and as I said, if you find me on Pinterest, Joanna Hunter COM on Pinterest, if you find me on Pinterest, you will see my you will see my ancient giants board on there where I pinned lots and lots of things. Yes, that's right. Soldiers in Afghanistan found them in a cave. So again, they live in the earth and they're the mound builders, right? It's like the older language literally just says where the fact they lived and stuff like that. And again, Afghanistan, a lot of these countries around there had megalithic structures. Really, China, I don't really know of really any country that did not have some type of giant mythology or giant lore, or, you know, basically there was giants there. Turkey is another country that apparently have dug up thousands of bones. The Britons, the United Kingdom, all of those, you know, Sweden, you know, in Sweden, Norway, all of those Baltic countries, they had people that they called the frost giants, giants that lived up near the tundra. Yeah, there's just like, there's so many stories. So Joan's saying what happened to them though. Well, a lot of the stories, so the Lovelock giants of Western Nevada were actually cannibalistic and eating people. So people banded together to wipe them out. So they were wiped out. Local to my area, we have giants who connect with giants over your way, Joan, in Ireland. So those giants are Finn McCool, over at the Giant's Causeway, that apparently lived with his wife over at the Giant's Causeway. And then we had giants here in my local area who lived on top of a fort at the top of Strathpeffer, which is where I used to live, right? So they lived on top of the fort at Strathpeffer. Now, these giants could jump over the Cromarty Firth, which is the body of water, in a single leap. They had these big long poles. They would stick them in the water, and then they would like literally like leapfrog over, like pole vault over the water, and they could do it in a single leap. And so those giants had beef with Finn McCool, which is, so there's stories where the Scottish giants and the Irish giants connect. But those giants, there's a fort, a petrified fort at the very, very top of Strathpeffer, and they apparently lived in, and it's on top of a big mound. See where this is going? Now, you are not allowed by law to use metal detectors on the mound, right? So you're not allowed to use metal detectors on the mound, which is kind of weird because, you know, like where else do you know that there's a law like that? Anyway, you're not allowed to. Now, they had a giant in that tribe of giants. There was men and women and children. They had a giant called Gary. Now, this giant was called Gary, and he had apparently blonde hair, and he was very, very fair of face, and he loved his hair, and he was very vain about his hair, and he spent a lot of time combing it. And one day he fell asleep in the glen just below the big fortification at Strathpeffer, and he fell asleep in the glen. Now, the legend goes that the giant children like to tease Gary because he was a lot shorter than the fully grown men of that giant tribe. So they tied his hair to heather. And so they tied his hair to the heather that was all around him as he lay sleeping. So when he woke up, it pulled clumps of his hair out. And he lost the plot, and he got really angry, is how the legend goes. And he got really, really angry, and he lost the plot, and he chased all of the giant children and the giant women into the fortification where he barricaded them in and set them alight, killing all of the giant women and killing all of the giant children. But the other three men that belonged to the tribe, so there's four men including Gary, but the other three men, because they were much bigger in stature to Gary was quite small. Like, he was apparently about 9 feet high, but the other men in the tribe ranged between 12 and 15 feet in height, so they were very, very big. So Gary often didn't go hunting with them because the other men were like, you'll just slow us down, you little short ass at at sort of 9 feet, so you'll just slow us down. So because they were so much bigger than him, he often was left minding the children and the other wives. And so they were all off hunting. And of course, when they see the smoke on top of this mound, because it's really high, it's up on a place called the Cat's Back. So when they saw the smoke coming off the top of the Cat's Back, the giants abandoned what they were doing and they raced home, but it was too late. All of their wives and all of their children were dead. And Gary knew that he was in deep shit, so he started running. And the other giants, they took chase after him and they slew Gary. Now, if you're driving by car, it's about an hour and a half from Strathpeffer. And so this is the distance that these giants apparently covered. But they slew him in a glen, and that glen was forever known as Glengarry. And Glengarry is down by Brewer in our local area. So if anybody is local and listening to this and you're local, then now you know why the River Garry and Glengarry is called Glengarry, because that is where the giant Gary was slewed. And they killed him. And then there was just 3 giant men left. And they were very, very sad. They were heartbroken. Their wives and their children were dead. They had gotten the culprit for it and they didn't really know what to do. So apparently they trudged back to their local area, and legend has it that they also raised giant animals. Apparently they had giant ewes, and the horn of a giant ewe, they left this horn at the entrance of a cave near Rosemarkie. So this is another local land area around us. So in the entrance of a cave, they left this giant horn from a giant ewe, and they left that horn and they went into the cave and they fell into a slumber with a promise. And the promise was that when Alba, which is the traditional name of Scotland, was ever in deep, deep, deep shit, that you could blow on this horn 3 times and it would wake these giants up and they would fight for Scotland once more. So that is a local legend to me of giants. And you know, this is like when I often do my retreats and things, I sometimes hire a storyteller to come and keep the oral traditions of these oral stories alive, because I think it's really, really important, because a lot of these oral traditions tell of a history that has literally been expunged from our history books and no mainstream narrative is teaching. And I think it's so important to keep these lores and legends alive. And where in my local area where I live, the stories are insane. We have so many mythical creatures. There's another fabulous story of a hill in Inverness called Tirna Og, and it has a graveyard at the bottom of it, but it's known as the Hill of the Fairies, and it's known that it's filled and occupied with fae folk. So there's loads of these legends around, and we have things like kelpies and selkies. Selkies are people who look like seals in the water, but then they are able to shed their skin, so they're shapeshifters. They're able to shed their skin and come ashore, and they pass as humans. They look like humans. Those are selkies. Then we have kelpies. So kelpies are horses that have the head of a horse and the hoofs of a horse, but the body of a fish. sometimes, or sometimes they're just water horses. Again, mythical creatures that we have in the local area. So there's lots of things like that. But I find lots of these legends are based in some type of truth. And the funny thing is, you know, like we're passing, like here in Scotland, if you live up in Inverness, you will have at least been down what's known as the A9. At least 10 times in your life will you have travelled down the A9 to go to the big smoke of either Edinburgh or Glasgow, the big cities, right, in Scotland. So, you know, we're passing these things like Glengarry, you know, and we're passing things like Glengarry and having no idea that our own Scottish history is actually got place names that are named after giants. There are giants that are literally, you know, like are place names. In America, there is a lot of place names that actually come from Native American words for giants. So it's incredible. It's so interwoven. But because of the way that our generations work, it doesn't actually take very long for people to be able to like remove shit from history. You know, if you look at the, you know, in 1848, common knowledge that giants were a thing, 2023, what are you talking about? What? That's nuts. Everybody knows giants aren't real, right? But like Abraham Lincoln, common fucking knowledge. Roll on, you know, roll on 2023, we're all scratching our heads going, that can't be real, that can't be true. And you can just show in how many generations are we talking from 1848 to 2023? How many generations did knowledge completely just disappear? Like, it blows my mind. I'm going to make another story time about something that I'm really excited to make story time about. Like, all this stuff isn't really exciting. It's all really exciting. But about a lost civilization that's like totally been removed from the history books. And have you ever wondered why there's pyramids in Egypt? And there's pyramids in China and in Bosnia. And there's pyramids all over the world. And there's pyramids in all over Central America. And there's pyramids pretty much globe round. Bet you didn't know that. The Chinese pyramid is actually 5 times the size of the Great Pyramid at Giza. The Chinese pyramids have a big veil of secrecy around them, but they have got satellite imagery of them. Pyramids in Antarctica. Do you want to know why? Well, again, this is another thing that they've expunged from history. An entire lost civilization that was mega advanced. Like, mega advanced. And it wasn't Atlantis, and it wasn't Lemuria. Completely, you probably have not heard of this civilization, but I will make that will be story time for another time. So we have the Glengarry bonnet in our Highland outfit. Amazing. Well, there you go, right? So now you know that your bonnet or that tartan is named after a giant. How cool is that? So yeah, I will leave you there, but I hope that you enjoy these. Let me know in the comments if you do, and maybe I'll turn them into a wee series, because there's so much lost history out there. There's so much stuff, and there's so much like connotations with metaphysical energy and stuff like that all in there. And so yeah, I hope that you really enjoyed today's story time, and have a brilliant Sunday wherever you are. It's like I don't know if I can turn this around. You can see it's quite a grotty day outside. We've got lots and lots of rain today, but I am all warm and cozy in my library, and I'm about to get into a book which I'm really excited about. Have not even started it yet, so I can't even tell you if it's good or not, but it's actually a fiction book, but it's based on the story of Medusa. So if you like, what they've said about this is a beautiful retelling, powerful and haunting, and apparently it's the retelling. Here's how it starts. If I told you that I killed a man with a glance, would you wait to hear the rest? Why, the how, and what happened next? Exiled to a far-flung island after being abused by powerful gods, Medusa has little company other than the snakes that adorn her head instead of hair. Haunted by the memories of a life before her that was stolen from her, she has no choice but to make peace with her present. Medusa the monster. But when the charmed and beautiful Perseus arrives on the island, her lonely existence is blown apart, unleashing desire, love, and betrayal. Monster, man-hater, murderess, forget everything you've been told about Medusa in the new version of the story the history that is set in stone long ago. So it's all about a retelling of the story of Medusa from the point of view of Medusa. But it is fiction, but I love the idea of it. So that is what I'm going to be reading. It's by a woman called Jessie Burton, who has actually got a novel that's out. What was it called now? Her novel was called The Miniaturist, and it sold over 1 million copies, that one. So I thought I'd give this a whirl. So I hope you enjoyed story time, and I will speak to you guys soon. Have a great day. Bye.